Everyone. My name is Neil Foote, and welcome to this evening's edition of Soul Talk, the Art Edition. And what a pleasure I have this evening to talking to one of the legendary cultural photographers of our time, Chester Higgins Jr.
Well, thank you, Neil. Thank you for having me.
Chester, your work has, as an old school journalist who's always read the newspaper and grown up in New York, I saw your photos for forever and a day, and certainly throughout the course of time, I have followed your work. So I'm so glad you could join us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, the few people who probably don't know who Chester Higgins Jr. is, but I wanted to take a few minutes and let folks know that you've got quite a background, quite a career, and spend a little bit of time talking about where you came from, a little bit about your approach to photography. Then I want to dive into some of your work and share some of your unbelievable pictures over time. And I want to actually pause for a moment because certainly this year and certainly this past week, we are at this moment in history, and what your photography over the years has captured many of these moments. And I'm curious, have you been out with your camera walking around at all in Brooklyn and trying to capture it? What do you think about what's going on right now?
Well, the short answer is no, but I did one day go to a Black Lives Matter event that happened at Barclays Center, which is about 8 blocks from me.
Yeah,
I was just moved to see that the different placards that people were carrying and things that what it said, and I was moved also because to see that it was so multiracial, and that the value of Black people has something that has been embraced by a larger white community and Asian community. And that to me is a big difference. And I think that is part of the reason why change can happen, institutional change can happen, because, it had been something that we have just been doing by ourselves. And then we've had our writers like Jimmy Baldwin and people, Nikki Giovanni, talk about it. And we had our filmmakers. So everything have sort of these different rivers have there's a confluence of all these things. Mm-hmm. And this is a great time, and I'm happy to see it because my life has always been a race, man, and I've always been trying to part of the movement, the struggle. So and the struggle will always continue, but it's good to see that the struggle has at least got on top of a foothill. The mountain is still there, but it's out of the valley.
Yeah, that's a good kind of starting point, Chester, because you've been described and even have described yourself as a cultural anthropologist. What does that mean as a photographer? I mean, people sometimes don't understand the work that you have to do to take the pictures that you have and how they capture that moment in time. But what do you mean by cultural anthropologist? What is that?
Well, before I answer that, I have to say that you use the word, which is normal, that people use the word of taking pictures. I don't take pictures. I make pictures. Mm-hmm. And my cultural anthropology is about trying to, because to me, the Black skin is not a shame. Black skin it represents something very great in our history, and our achievements as a people go very deep and very long. So I'm looking at the culture, the American culture, African American culture, but as an anthropologist. But I have two hats. So one of them is looking at the culture that we've set forth here in America, but also anthropologically. What is the antecedent to our culture? The culture that's in our home place on the continent of Africa. So I combine those two things. I approach my study of African Americans from a position of love, my approach of continental Africans from a position of love, but I also approach us from a short and long-term memory. So in the African American experience, it's a short-term memory, and the continental experience is a long-term memory, because both of those things belong to us, and we should embrace both of those things. And this is why I did the book called Feeling the Spirit, searching for the people, the world, for the people of Africa, so that we can see that, first of all, the book does not start off in West Africa with enslavement. It starts off in our history in East Africa, which is thousands of years before. But then the other thing about the book is I tried to show emotionally that we are the same people, and that you can have one page in this book is on the continent, another page could be in the Caribbean, another page could be in the States, but we're all the same people, we're all connected, we're all essentially cousins. And I just try to introduce cousins to each other. And when I look at people, African Americans or continental Africans, I approach them and I look at them as cousins, and I look at them as part of this long timeline, of this long fabric of our culture and our time here on the planet, and the achievements that we made, and to amplify our sense of greatness.
There's a great quote from one of your presentations that I heard was, if I might, my life mission is to use photography to create a photographic encyclopedia of the life and times of people of African descent.
Right.
I played that back. I think this was a presentation you did maybe back at the Freedom Forum many years before. And folks, Chester's work has been displayed in museums and exhibits all around the world, and as will evolve. But that phrase just stood out to me so much, because I think it goes to, again, your sense of making pictures and your purpose of why you have a camera, and how you have used it over the years to capture the culture. How did you come to think that way, and what motivated you to kind of realize that the power you have with your camera could be so significant?
Well, I really didn't know it until the civil rights movement, because I wasn't into photography until I accidentally got into photography while at Tuskegee, because I discovered this man, P.H. Polk, who had all these great photographs that were hidden behind a curtain of very distinguished poor people that he made during the Depression, that he made for himself. He found people who were coming in town for the week market, and he said when he saw an interesting character, he ran out to them and he offered them money to come and let him make their picture. And this made me realize that, wow, my relatives, who I love very much, my great uncles and my great aunts, the only thing they have on their wall is a calendar that may be the Farmer's Almanac, and a picture of Jesus Christ somewhere. A painted picture of imaginary Jesus Christ.
Yeah. We've seen those in all of our families and grandparents' homes over the years.
So I said, wow, because I love them so much, they should not die without seeing a picture of themselves on their wall. What it would do to them, to their sense of self, to be able to celebrate themselves with their own picture. So I had to learn how to be a photographer. I had to learn how to work the camera in order to go back home and make these pictures of my relatives. And I made the pictures and took them to them and put them up on their walls, and looked at them and carefully studied their faces when these pictures went up, and they adjusted to them being in their space. But then at the same time, a few months later, I would go with students from Tuskegee when we will take the buses and go over to Montgomery and have protests against George Wallace. He was an infamous governor of our state. And when we come back, I noticed that something that had always been a factor visually, but I never paid attention to it before. But in the newspaper and in the television, we weren't looked at as American citizens petitioning our government. Instead, the visuals made us look like we were potential thugs, arsonists, and rapists. And it made me realize the power of the camera, and how we have always ignored the white gaze towards us because we never expected it to be normal, to be fair. But it made me realize that, wow, I can make different kinds of pictures here from the inside. But I also realized that I couldn't get the local press. I would get nowhere going to the local press and telling them how racist they are. So I went to New York that following summer to meet, because there were no schools in photography. Mm-hmm. You had to try to find a mentor. And I went and I met with the photo editors of Life, Newsweek, Time, and Look magazine. And I said to them, look, I called them up and I said, look, I'm not looking for a job. I'm from Alabama. I want to learn how to be a better photographer. You see the best photographers. Could you take a look at my work and tell me the gap that I have? And so, because I want to learn how to make compelling images, because that's what my people need. I met a guy at Look magazine, Arthur Rothstein. I told him that, and he said, wow, that's a pretty tall order, Chester. And I said, well, I have no choice. That's what my people deserve. He said, okay. So I worked with him for the whole summer, and he taught me visual linguistics. He taught me so well that I was able to go after that summer it brought my game up high so that I could go out and make compelling images. And that's what I've been doing since. I hitched I picked up photography because in my heart, I wanted to express my love for my relatives.
I want to pause it there because Arthur didn't just look at your pictures and say, oh yeah, do this, do that. He used an interesting technique for you to understand how to better get the best image out of your pictures. Talk about what he did to help you understand what you were missing, quite honestly, in the images you made.
So the first thing he did, he said, let me see your pictures. I showed him my pictures, and he took the pictures, and he then took 4 pieces of paper, and he made them all at right angles to each other and shifted them around and made his own window on the pictures. And I came to understand that was cropping. And he made his little window, and he said, well, come, take a look. Here's your picture. And my picture was, a small portion of the overall picture, but it was a powerful picture. I'm looking at him amazed. I said, my God, did I do that? No, I did that, but I didn't know what I was doing, because he said, you compromised the picture with all these other things that are extraneous that had nothing to do with it. So he taught me visual linguistics. Also in that summer, I learned kinesics, visual kinesics. Mm-hmm. Between those 2 things, and every day seeing this man for a whole summer, and him sending me to museums. I'd never been to a museum before. He sent me to look at, he gave me a list of people. He sent me off to the Metropolitan Museum. And he said, look, I don't care if you like these people or not. What I care about is if you can tell me why. Mm. So I went to the Met. We had our discussions after with the Met images. I went to the Frick. We had discussions on Frick images. And then he sends me over to the one day, maybe. So this process started in June until September. And I didn't really know, I really appreciated this man because I knew he was a great teacher. 2 things I didn't know about him. He sends me over to the Metropolitan Museum, to the picture collection, and to meet John Salkowski, who was a giant in the photography world. Mm-hmm. And then to look at particular images in their photo collections. So Grace Mayer, who was there, showed me where I should look, and I'm looking and looking and looking of all these FSA photographers and seeing how they have seen the South, which is the subject matter I'm dealing with. Mm-hmm. And I come across images made by this guy, Arthur Rothstein. I was very excited. I ran back to his office because Look magazine was at Madison and 53rd and Second, and the Met was at, the Modern was on 53rd Street. And I went in and I says, hey, Mr. Rothstein, they got pictures of yours over there. He got a big kick out of that one.
He said, well, of course.
So that was my first understanding who this guy was. And then I realized, looking at some of those pictures, he had been to Tuskegee. He had made pictures of co-eds at Tuskegee. So that I had no idea that in the back of his mind there was a bridge in time that was between, because my introduction to him is that I'm from Tuskegee, that, so he never said to me that, yes, I know Tuskegee, I've been there. He never said to me he was the first photographer hired by FSA. He just went right in and responded to my enthusiasm and my, because I'm the one who's got this project, not him. I just have to learn how to see better. And then that's, and then when I came out and after Tuskegee, he gave me my first job and my first assignment, which was following Jesse Jackson around for a week. And that resulted in a 5-page spread in Look. And I did a couple other stories that died on the vine, so to speak, because Look went out of business a couple months later. But, we need, you can't do anything great without allies. You need to have allies. You need to find who those allies are. Mm-hmm. I remember once I was at the Times, I was doing, they did so much to try to dissuade me, to try to make me quit. So they started me off on this 4 to 12 shift. So I tried to make it work for me because the Times had a great library. Mm-hmm. When I wasn't working, I was in the library. That's how I read W.B. Du Bois' Philadelphia Study. Couldn't find it anywhere, but they had it. So the Times for me was like a research institute. Yeah. That I could make use of. And once I was trying to do something and I went up to the printers and I needed something done, and one guy comes over to me, like, who are you? What are you doing? Redneck kind of guy. And I just said, well, look, are you asking me that because you want to help me or you want to stop me? He looks at me. He's okay. What do you want?
Just called it out. Called it as it was, right?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't asking for much, but it was something that only that department could do. But life is, I think I learned that by living in the South, because, you grew up where I come from, you grew up, guns is part of your culture, right. The hunt. But guns is also a part of your culture to survive.
Right.
Because, if the crazy white guy knows that you can shoot back, then he thinks twice about shooting at you. Mm-hmm. But if you're defensive, bullies only jump on people who they think that won't hurt them. Mm-hmm. So,
I want to kind of pause for a second there and kind of for our audience to kind of put a frame to this, that here it is, Chester Higgins Jr., a kid who grew up in small 800-person village town in Alabama, ends up at Tuskegee, and here it is with Professor P.H. Polk. And for all the folks who know anything about Tuskegee, it will know that P.H. Polk wasn't just any passing by photographer or professor. This was the P.H. Polk, and that's right. And for those who don't know who P.H. Polk, just briefly, this mentor who you again used your curious skills to say, hey, professor, what's behind the curtain? But this is a legendary photographer unto himself, right?
And and Polk was very interesting in how he helped decide to help me, because I had my major was in business, and we'd hired Polk to do some pictures for the newspaper, and he didn't produce the day that we need to go to the press. I later found out that this is typical of Polk. He's always late. Mm-hmm. So I went back after talking about these pictures, and I said, Mr. Polk, would you teach me how to become a photographer? He said, well, let me understand something. He says, you want me to loan you because I said, well, could I use your camera like one afternoon or something? So he says, let me understand something. You want me to loan you the only camera that I use to make a living with to help you learn how to be a photographer? So I thought he was questioning my sincerity. I said, well, yes, Mr. Polk, that's right. So he says to me, we're sitting on this porch. He looks at me for a long time, and he finally says to me, he said, well, you know what? If you're fool enough to ask me, I'm going to be fool enough to help you. I didn't realize it 2 years later what he meant. But after 2 times, I didn't ask him for his camera anymore. I realized he he didn't want to part with his camera. But what I did is I spent the rest of months until I bought my camera, going over to his house almost twice a week, looking at many different pictures that he had lying around, to ask him questions about those pictures. And what that helped me learn was it demystified the process of being a photographer. And it helped me realize what were the most important skills, how people skills were just as important as, say, technical skills, and the interplay of those things going together. So that when I did get to the point that I could buy my first camera with a meter, which is a skill that Mr. Pope could read light and I couldn't, then that's when things begin to advance.
Yeah, and then, you know, and Professor Pope had spent some 50 years at Tuskegee, and you know, again, putting it in context here, and here it is, this kid who's up in New York is hanging out with this famed photographer, photo editor, Arthur Rothstein, and then you find yourself landing at the New York Times and spending a good bulk of your career there as one of the photographers there, as you just, again, pointing out that for the midnight shift that they were trying to punish you probably was among the best things they could. Which is another lesson in life, right? How do you take advantage of those situations?
You take advantage of it. Yeah. And then, you know, I must say that Tuskegee has a school of photography. You know, we had Beidou, we had, Pope worked for Beidou, and not Ball, I forget his first name, but we had Booker T. Washington set up this photography department at Tuskegee. 3 great photographers came out of that department, were produced by that department, Mr. Pope being the last one. So I like to think that I fit into I stand on the shoulders of those guys, and that the Tuskegee School of Photography is something that produced me and that I am a product of. After Look went out of business, I started freelancing. My first freelance job, I was getting jobs from Time and Newsweek, and I got this job from Time. And my Southerners really helped me in this. But I think the Time people were trying to get rid of me. The Time magazine people were trying to get rid of me. They sent me to photograph Rabbi Kahane. Do you know who Rabbi Kahane is?
Yeah.
He was head of the Jewish Defense League. A real radical guy, the guy who calls Arabs rats. And who essentially is the brainchild of the settler movement. And they sent me to this address on West 42nd Street, and at some partially abandoned building, and I knock on the door, and a metal door, and this thuggish guy opens the door and looks at me and realizes I'm Black, and he's like, "What do you want?" I must have the wrong place. So I said, "Well, I'm with Time Magazine, and I'm here to make a picture of a man named Rabbi Kahane." He looks at me, he says, "Wait," he closes the door. Then he comes back, opens the door, and then leads me down a long hallway, and and on either side, about maybe 10 guys, 5 on either side, thuggish, dressed in their black, you know, standing there, full of intimidation, you know? But, you know, coming from the South, you know, you have to decide, okay, look, if you want to kill me, fine, but I'm not the only one that's going to die. So I can deal with this. So they take me in. I go upstairs in the back of this hallway, and this small guy has his back to me, and he turned around, he looks at me, he says to his one other friend who's in there, he says, "Oh, they sent you." Then he turns to his friend and says, "This will never run." So I ignore him. I tell him what to do, make his picture, and the picture does run. It runs, I live, so we're okay. But, you know, it made me think, you know, I think a Northern African American may have had more problems in that situation than a Southerner, only because, you know, every day we live that experience where your life could be on the line, where Northerners intellectually may have a feeling about it, but I notice that Northerners somehow can be more easily intimidated by that sort of behavior than Southerners. So it worked.
I want to talk about 2 other influences in your life, and then I want to go to the photos. Gordon Parks, who again is kind of this Renaissance man, a photographer, a filmmaker, and so many other things. you had a chance to cross paths with him during your career. How did he influence you?
Gordon influenced me. First of all, Gordon influenced me by his example.
Mm-hmm.
He was doing powerful stuff. Remember his Black Panther series, his Black Muslim series, doing powerful stuff that, without trying to, I didn't see his Harlem series until later that he did with Ellington. But his imageries, the Black people spoke eloquently and very exactly through his images. When I met him, he had retired from life. He was then in the filmmaking business and writing books. He was just before he was doing Shaft. So it turns out that Arthur Rothstein introduced me to Cornell Copper, and the two of them knew Gordon. And I tried to read, and they said, you got to talk to Gordon. So I tried reaching Gordon, and so they didn't know how to get in touch with him. So they thought that he lived in Westchester. So I called up, and sure enough, he was listed in Westchester. And I called this number, and this woman answered several times, and she said, well, he's not here. I said, not there. I said, finally, I found out through the grapevine that he lived in the UN Plaza building in Manhattan. So I called there, and I got him. And we sat down, we started talking. And I said, well, I've been trying to get you. He said, well, how? Where? I said, I've been going to Westchester. He said, that's my ex-wife. I said to myself, why couldn't she just tell me that, you guys are divorced and you don't live here? But anyway, so I tell Gordon, whenever you meet people, the question is, what's your mission? Why are you here? What's on your mind? And I told him what was on my mind, and that I felt that, the image of African Americans was maligned, and that it was our responsibility to change that, because white photographers can't see what is missing, the three essential elements of decency, dignity, and virtuous character. And he says, well, if that's how you feel when you get assignments from them, there's 36 rolls on a film. Roll of film. Make sure that every roll, every frame you make is that, because if you make 35 frames out of your conviction, and you slip and you make the one frame that they will make, then believe me, that one frame is the one they're going to use. And you've blown your opportunity. He said, don't give them a chance. Don't give them an opportunity to find a negative image. Make sure that they have to choose a positive image. They may not want to hire you next time, but that's their problem. But don't give them an opportunity to do that. And so that was, very heartwarming. And then I learned so much about the business from Gordon, and, because things would happen. And, the best use of a mentor is someone who you can ask a question, not someone you don't need to be around that person all the time. Right. They got a life. But every now and then you run into something you just can't figure out. And that's when I would call Gordon or Rothstein or Copper, and I would say, look, this has happened, blah, blah, blah. I don't understand this. And then they would break it down for me. And I said, okay, so what should I do? They would break that down for me too, and then I go.
There you go. Omar Bearden was another person who kind of taught you a little bit about light and talk about how his beautiful work kind of influenced you.
Well, I saw Bearden's work. I was working on the book on Black men. And I saw Bearden's work. I forget where it was now, but I think it was on there's a series he did called Amistad. And what struck me was how Africa was a central piece in that work, which is something that African Americans weren't doing. And see, I started living in Africa for the summers. My first trip in Africa was 71. And I started living in the summers. And I moved around from 71 from West Africa to East Africa, Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, and then Senegal and Ghana. And then the summer of 72 and 73, I lived in Ghana. The 74 summer, I lived in Senegal. And my book on Black men came out in 74, which was, I called Drums of Life, which was inspired by my African experience. So when I saw Romy's stuff, I was impressed by two things. One, the content, And then two, how he sort of redefined space and light. I said, I've got to have this guy in my book on Black men. So I called him up. I found out how to reach him, called him up, and I told him what I want to do. And I came over, he let me make his picture. And then we began talking. And then I realized that Romy also was a great teacher. And it's the first time I realized that I could be taught photography by a non-photographer, being a painter, so we were visual, but we use a different medium. Romy would say, a painter could put light wherever he wanted it. But the photographer has to be able to see the light and place in himself or herself in such a way that the light works for them. So I had learned visual linguistics from Rothstein, and Romy is teaching me a different appreciation of lighting, and he taught me that by painters. So he would look at my pictures when I would go by to visit him. He would make appointments with artists to show up on the Saturday mornings. He would hold court. And he would look at my pictures, and then he would go up and take the ladder up his bookshelf, and he would pull down a Dutch painter or Rembrandt or Caravaggio. And he would say, look how they use the light. And look at the effect of the light here and the effect of the light there. So it became another way of studying light through the use of painters. And that really amplified my relationship with light. So much so I say to people that light is my mistress, because after content, the whole thing I'm really interested in is light, how light energizes the images. How does it energize the spirit? It's a very, very important element, whether it's light or lack of light, positive, negative space, all that stuff.
Yeah, well, to me, I think that's the difference between me picking up my iPhone and taking a picture and Chester Higgins, right? I've talked to so many photographers over the years who talk about going to, particularly when they know where they want to shoot something, and spending days at a time or to look at the lighting and when best to shoot certain things, which I think is so powerful. Again, something that a novice, as I am, though my dad did have a dark room in the basement of my house, so he taught me how to develop film. The old school way of rolling.
Yes, yep. Stick it in that fixture, in that Dectol 76, and then wash it and put it after the fixer.
You got it. I think that smell is probably still in our basement. But listen, let's we've been talking a lot about your work, so let's go to some of your work. We really need like an 8-hour series to go through so much of your work. Again, for our audience, Chester has several books, as he said. His memoir, Echo of the Spirit, A Photographer's Journey. We're going to talk a little bit about it in a few minutes. Ancient Nubia, African Kingdoms on the Nile. His pictures have appeared in Art News, New York Times, Look, Life, Newsweek, Fortune, name a publication he has, and his work has been seen around the world. So if we can, let's I want to walk through some of these pictures, and perhaps, you can talk a little bit about this first series are really some celebrities. And again, here's a wonderful picture here. This is Nikki Giovanni, correct?
Yep, Nikki Giovanni around 1970. Nikki, I'm attracted not necessarily to celebrities. I'm attracted to people who I agree with politically. I'm attracted to people who are political, and I'm attracted to people who are cultural. And so Nikki's work, I read her work, and I really felt the heart of where she was coming from. And I have photographed her in many different situations. And but there's a couple where the light was very contrasty, very striking. Nikki being herself, but using that light to amplify who she is, and using that afro of hers to crown her, using the light and afro to crown her, and using that side light to really jump her out.
Yes.
And this is Toni Morrison.
Mm-hmm.
who also a very powerful writer that I agree with, and trying to capture their personhood. That these women, but they are people of substance, and I love that. I mean, I grew up with a very strong woman who was a teacher, and her friends, all of them strong women. All my cousins, only had one male cousin, the rest of them were women cousins, and they were all very strong personalities. So I'm very comfortable. I don't feel intimidated, or threatened by strong women. I love it. They should be. And I think with my camera, I try to capture that so that other people can feel and not put myself in between them and the picture, but let them have the picture so that they can communicate directly their strength to the viewers.
Yeah, I mean,
and this is Miss Aretha in performance at the Apollo Theater in Harlem. And those sweating bees. Aretha worked hard. She works hard.
Mm-hmm.
This was she had just come out with the album "A Spirit in the Night." I think it's called "A Spirit in the Night," "Feeling of the Night." That she did a piece with Ray Charles, but this was her working with King Curtis, who was killed about a few months after this.
Well, what I think is fascinating, and in my work, just I've had to hire photographers to shoot so many different events, and particularly concerts, and
mm-hmm.
I don't know how frustrated I am when I get all these pictures back, Chester, of performers in front of microphones.
I hate microphones. I hate them. I hate them. I try to wait for the, like you can see here, this is the kind of moment where she moves back. She's not into the microphone, and but she's into, but the spirit she's in possession.
Yes.
And to me, that combination with the light and the possession and the sweat.
Yes. No, that's that's to me again, it's kind of being keen to the moment of how to get that
mm-hmm.
image. The same, we can move to some of the other photos, but I think you think these are what some people might say, oh well, these are just portraits, but once again, there's something that you're trying to capture in those. We can pause there because this kind of goes into
the Maya.
These are shots from Mr. Soul, correct?
Right, but I want to say something.
Please.
What people don't understand is there is an investment of work. It looks simple. Great photographs should look simple. But if I'm photographing somebody, if they're a writer, I want to read what of what it is that's coming through them. What's coming? How is their spirit speaking? Because when I photograph, yes, it's obvious, what I'm looking at, the appearance of, but I'm more interested in the spirit of something.
Mm-hmm.
The appearance is just the beginning of something. And I can only, and there's two ways for me to get that spirit. The first, I have to, before I come in contact with them, I have to know who they are as much as I can. That's
Mm-hmm.
where writing and music comes in hand, the art comes in hand.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing, obviously, is my awareness once I'm in their company, and how I filter those things together, and that the combination of that, and then my skill in the lighting and the shooting, all of those things come together. But I have to know something about the person that I'm looking at. Now, obviously, at the times. In assignments, you don't get a chance to get much information on some things, but right. so then you fall back on your awareness radar the moment you're in their environment. But I'm always having to pull something that's not obvious, that is in the person that makes up the image.
Yeah, well, which again, that difference between that assignment you got from the New York Times that said you had about 2 hours to turn around a photo, but Fortunately, yeah. Or
most times this could be 15 to 20 minutes.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, and I would think in those moments you drew off of some of your experience to try to figure out how best to get that.
Well, I say to people, the more you understand yourself, the more you understand somebody else. So if I can do, so then I can empathize and I can understand if I'm dealing with a shy person, I'm dealing with a aggressive person, if I'm dealing with a profound person, or I'm dealing with a shallow person, all of that stuff. And then, recognizing those things in we have all that in all of us, recognizing on what's important, and I can zero in on that and come away with the image.
Great. Yeah.
Yes, this is from Pat LaBelle at the Soul Show.
Mm-hmm. And I think we have a couple pictures from the Soul Show.
I was a staff photographer for 3 years for the Soul Show. I started in 68, and I started in 70 to 73. And here you have the back is the producer and the host, Ellis Hayslip, and interviewing Kathleen Cleaver, and Ernie, I forget Ernie's last name, the stage manager, checking everything if it was ready to roll.
Yeah, we then Black Film did show the film a couple years ago, and then recently did a screening of the film when it came back out, I guess a couple months ago. And what a fascinating moment in time that must have been for you to capture. And again, these were images of again, cultural icons in so many different ways who were coming through this show, and clearly, Ellis was making a point with every single guest and every single moment on that show.
Right. Yep. I follow the spirit. Where the spirit leads me. Here, Jimmy Baldwin, who at Tuskegee, we had to read a couple of his books. So I think Notes of a Native Son was, I think, the first book of his that I read. So I knew a lot about what went on in his head. My one regret is that I wasn't a photographer interested in photography when Martin Luther King came to Tuskegee, or when I sat across the table from Malcolm X in the student newspaper lounge when he came, or that I went that I didn't go on the Selma Montgomery March when James Bowen and everybody was there. But the spirit has if those things were meant for me, they happened to me later, and.
Yeah, we'll go through some of the other photos because I think there's some fascinating moments there.
And this is brother Al.
Brother
Al. Brother Al is so cool, The women just fall all over themselves. And this is oh my God, I'm getting old.
It's Rosa.
Rosa Parks, yes.
Rosa, yes. Yeah. Was this on the show, or was this another?
No, she was doing an event at the Schomburg,
okay.
and I went backstage before she came on into the holding room to greet her, and here I made this picture.
It's wonderful.
This is at Harry Belafonte's house. A picture of Harry, I guess about maybe 25 years ago.
Yeah, at least, yeah. Excellent.
And this is Gordon Parks at his house. I used to make a lot of different pictures of Gordon, but I made this picture when I was trying to do the book on elders called Elder Grace, The Nobility of Aging. Because Gordon had always, over the decades, he'd always been there for me. And this is Lena Horne I made for a story for Essence magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the Secretary General for UN, Kofi Annan, who I've been friends with his brother since 1972. In fact, his brother helped me travel cheaply on charter flights to Ghana in 72 and 73. And we're still friends. And so this is but Kofi I met later when I was living on Roosevelt Island. And I did a story for him on him for the New York Times Sunday magazine. This picture, I wanted the Sunday magazine to put on the cover. They would not.
Now, what did they end up putting on the cover?
they had some horrible picture that this white photographer made, a very close-up of Kofi. It was just, I just hated it. But the art director thought it was more artsy. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but when he died, this became the biggest obituary picture the Times has ever run, like a 4-column picture.
Wow.
So, which was, kind of a surprise, I'm sure, to most white people that, a Black man, an African man could be so regal looking and have risen so high in the world, in the diplomatic world.
Yeah, these next series of pictures kind of capture some of the civil rights and was this SNCC or where was this?
This is in the Black Power Conference in Gary, Indiana.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I think this was 71 or 72. This is and so in this huge gymnasium, on the floor and the bleachers, you had delegations from different states.
Mm-hmm.
Different state delegations were they were caucus among themselves, and then they would vote for platform issues and what have you.
Excellent. We'll bounce through the next couple pictures.
This is in my church, hometown of in New Brockton, the Springfield Baptist Church. And, so I couldn't get Dr. King alive, but I got Dr. King here, held on the fans. And here is my issue. I have this interesting relationship to death.
Yeah.
Looking at a coffin that's to be buried, and the finality of death is an issue.
Yeah, I was just fascinated by that picture because it says so much about, I mean, all the things you just said there about death and loneliness and that moment, kind of what happens next in our lives. Fascinating.
When we go to the soil never gives us back. This is in Brazil, African religion, Candomblé Macumba. And this is a ritual where they use popcorn as a part of a baptismal ritual against smallpox and contagious diseases. And these women dressed in white, or the baianas, they call themselves. And she's doing this as a ritual to the African goddess Umalu, the goddess of contagious disease.
And I would imagine this is one of several hundred frames that you had taken at that moment.
100,000. I mean, I go to a place each year. I would go and spend usually 6 weeks in a different place. So this particular year, I spent in Brazil, and that's the year that Nelson Mandela was released from prison. Here I am sitting in my hotel room with my wife, my girlfriend at the time, and I'm looking at. Because I always wanted to say, wow, I want to be there when Nelson Mandela's released. Yeah. And I'm sitting there in Brazil, and I said, my God, I missed it. But there again, I give it up to the Spirit. If the Spirit intends for me to have a picture of Mandela, it would make it so. I don't know, do you have Mandela's picture in here?
Yeah, I think we do, yes.
We'll talk about it later. But I was in Brazil, studying African religious expression in Brazil, because I've been exposed to African religious expression by living in Ghana. And Ghana's next to Togo, Zoom Society. So, it was, but part of my work on the African diaspora that came to be feel in the spirit was seeing how we have, our ancient memory has remained in so many of us, and how we've taken it, how the culture from continental Africa remain an element in the lives of Western-born Africans. And here in Brazil was an example.
Wow. Yes.
This is in my hometown again. Minnie Pearl and John Bass. John Bass trying his best to see if he could court Minnie Pearl, and Minnie Pearl just looking at him. John didn't get nowhere, but he made a good effort.
Again, these two frames here are just kind of wonderful portraits. To me, go back to your early days of taking those pictures of your family.
Yep. So this is a picture of a couple that, to me, I'm really impressed what I call couples who emotionally spoon. Those are the best couples. You see, if you take two spoons and you put them inside of each other, that's what I call And when I'm talking about emotional spooning, that's the image that I'm having.
Yes, that's wonderful.
And some people have that, and it's really rare, and it's beautiful to see. Too many relationships are forks and knives, but when you see the emotional spooning, I celebrate those. And with my camera, I use my camera to celebrate what I think is good, to show respect for something that I think is good, to amplify it. And so I make the effort to go back in this situation. I set up a studio in these people's apartment. It's another one. Emotional spooners. And I feel I'm fortunate with my wife, my second wife, and I, that we have an emotional spooning relationship, because that's the best relationship you can possibly have.
Yeah, I thought those are just wonderful. Exactly, in terms of the emotion, the love.
And then it was interesting, this picture, these people, when I went to photograph them, I started talking to them. He's a Democrat, she's a Republican. So they were having one of these arguments, and I didn't know what to do, So the guy took pity on me. He looked at me, he said, "Oh, I guess, Mr. Higgins, you haven't run into this before." He says, "The reason we're having this disagreement is that she's Republican and I'm Democrat." She speaks up and, "Yes, when we go to the polls, we vote each other, we cancel each other out." Okay. This is more than I know what to deal with, but okay, it works.
There you go. Let's snap that picture.
Yeah.
The next series of photos kind of get into, the love of some of your work that you've done over the years of spending much time in Nubia and Ethiopia, and talk about some of the work you've done in Ethiopia, and particularly this book here is just some unbelievable photos.
Well, what I've learned about living in Africa and being African American is that we Western-born Africans, unfortunately, because of the oppression we have gone through, has been rubbed out of us. We are Africans without memory, and we are Americans without privilege. James Baldwin said that.
Wow.
I didn't say that. James Baldwin said that. And I know it so well from living it. James Baldwin never lived in Africa. I've lived in both places. I know every year, for the last 35 years, I go to Africa. To me, it's cheaper than therapy. And when you see Africa, what our people have left behind and chiseled in the walls of their huge monuments, huge pyramids, huge tombs, you realize how great we were and how great we can be. Yes, we went through a period, wars on top of wars on top of wars, which destroys people, destroys civilization. But the same people who built that, we are those same people. And with the right kind of organization and clarity, we can do it again. Here in Ethiopia, looking at the African Jews and the people who believe in nature in Ethiopia, who are the foundation for the Bible. Their belief system is the foundation for our Bible. This is a priest and holding this rod. And here, people who believe in nature going to this lake that's inside of a volcano, Crater Lake, making offerings to nature, making offerings to the water, to baptize themselves, and to thank nature. Because nature, without nature, we wouldn't have anything. We wouldn't have writing, we wouldn't have the Bible, we wouldn't have the prophets. If the nature doesn't give us water that gives life, and didn't give us air that we could breathe, and those combination with the sun give us plant life, we would have nothing. That's why African religion is based upon nature, not based upon words that men write. And this is from one of the temples in Luxor, Egypt, the Temple of Karnak. At one point, there was a ceiling on top of that. This is how high it went up. And these columns you see are so big that 40 people can stand on the top in a circle. That's how big they are.
That's people, holy crow.
Yes.
Wow.
These are pyramids in Nubia. Actually, there's almost 200 pyramids in Sudan and Nubia, and less than 100 in Egypt, but they are different. The Egyptian pyramids, there's nothing more grand than those. Those pyramids are 35 stories high. So next time you go in a building and you're on an elevator and you get off on the 35th floor, please walk to a window, see what you see. That's what you see when you climb to the top of the pyramid. Now, these pyramids in Nubia are no more than 15 stories high. And they also pitch different. The Egyptian pyramids are pitched at 45-degree angle. The Nubian pyramids are pitched at 60-degree angles. But they're all fascinating. And it's like almost a miniature of the Egyptian models. But what in these pyramids are burials. The people who they served thought so much of them that they built their tombs underground, and on top of their tombs that were dug out of the rock, they built these pyramids. Now, there's something about the pyramids you need to know. The pyramids that you see in Egypt and here do not have the white limestone that they originally had. In Egypt, the pyramid that we see was covered by white limestone until the 7th century AD, until the Arabs started using the sheeting, the surface of the limestone to quarry limestone to build huge buildings and walls in Cairo. So now they believe that God was nature, and the strongest force of nature is the sun. So if you have a huge building with white limestone reflecting the sun, imagine on the horizon what that looks like. So for them, they were bringing down God to be among them. And God was the light, not the sun itself, but the light behind it. Here, Nefertari's tomb. She was the wife of the great Ramses the Great. And you see on the crown, on her head, is the sun. The power of that sustains life and make life happen for all. And here you have a group of men, and there's women too, who have developed their own societies, who believe that the Egyptian faith is our sacred heritage. And that the patriarch faith come from that. And we should go and learn, now that we can read hieroglyphs, we should go and learn what the ancients are telling us and how their interpretation about nature. Here, a group of women from Brooklyn who travel to Egypt and make ceremonies in the different temples that they go to. Here's another a royal temple. These the tomb rather in Egypt. In the Valley of the Kings and the Queens, they are humongous. The biggest one goes back into the ground 300 feet. That's a football field.
Yes.
Corridors and rooms inside of the rock. And painted gloriously. These are the old-fashioned boats that are made from papyrus. This was the same kind of boat that would have been made, a smaller version, that would have been made to protect the baby Moses, as we talk about in the Bible. Here, made out of the papyrus reeds from the Nile.
Wow.
Other temple images in Egypt.
Yes.
Our ancestors left engraved on the walls all their beliefs and their understanding about nature and about the godliness of nature, the Creator. And finally, I say this: the hand that picked cotton now picks presidents, as well as the hand that the corrupted America system still keeps out. These are this also represents the bars that Black people have to deal with in trying to access true justice from the American system. But this year proved one thing in the election. I tell people that, we as Black people, we don't realize that white people hate each other. They really do. And so that they're equally divided in the vote. So that the Black vote makes a difference. And in this case, made the difference. And I'm looking forward to the Black vote in Georgia runoff, senatorial runoff, flipping the Senate. And that would happen only because Black people there make a difference. And we have to give it up to the women. It's the women. Even in the civil rights movement, it was the women who came forth, and the women who put all the air in the wind and then pushed the men up to the front, say, okay, you go talk. But it's the women. We should never forget that if it wasn't for our mothers and our sisters and our cousin women doing this, we would not be where we are now. There was a war in Ghana by the Queen of Asante Queen, because they had captured the king. and she was in charge, and she wanted to have to have an offense against the English, and the guys were sort of hesitant. She said, "Okay, all you guys who are not wearing skirts, come with me."
Chester, my goodness, we've only scratched the surface of your work. We will have to have you back to dive even deeper into your wonderful travels, your wonderful stories. You've always talked about your work, kind of making sure that all of us from African descent are more than just one dimension. And your career has been devoted to trying to make sure that the images that we see are more than one dimension. And tonight's conversation is just an example of how much care, how much devotion, how much work it goes into telling those stories and making them meaningful, and realizing that each one of those images, as you said, could be one of 1,000 frames or several thousand frames for you to kind of choose from to capture that moment in time to tell that story. We're most appreciative, Chester, for you sharing your time and expertise and knowledge with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I want to thank our sponsors, NBC5, and please follow us on social for any of our upcoming events. You can certainly always find out what's going on at Denton Black Film Festival and what we're doing on our website. Follow us on social at DBFF, at Denton BFF. ChesterHiggins.com is where you can find more of his work. My name is Neil Foote. You've been watching an episode tonight of a conversation with the legendary Black cultural photographer, Chester Higgins Jr. on Soul Talk. Enjoy the rest of your day, and please, looking forward to seeing you at future Soul Talks.